Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Gretchen Sugart, Executive Director of Theater Forward, a nonprofit organization based in New York City, unceded land of the Lenape people. Theater Forward provides financial support and services to 19 of our nation's most prominent theaters, reaching coast to coast, and has been a proud supporter of our guest tonight, American Repertory Theater, for over 40 years. We believe that theater has the power to foster humanity, create community, drive economies, inspire new ideas, and tell stories that dare to challenge us. So in moments like these, when our theaters are financially vulnerable, we ask that you join us to support theater across our nation. A couple of housekeeping things as we get started. This event is being recorded and will be available to view tomorrow. Later in the session, you can ask questions of the speakers by submitting them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll help moderate those questions. Now, I'm happy to introduce the American Repertory Theater, one of our nation's great cultural institutions, and its amazing leader. She is a 3-time Tony Award winner, a current Tony nominee for her direction of Jagged Little Pill, and the Terrie and Bradley Bloom Artistic Director of the American Repertory Theater. Please welcome our very special guest, Diane Paulus.
Hi, thank you, Gretchen. It's so funny making that Zoom entrance where you click 2 buttons and then here you are. So anyway, I'm so excited to be here. Grateful for the opportunity to connect with Theater Forward and ever grateful for their incredible support of the ART. So I'm going to say a few things about ART and then introduce my colleague who's joined us for tonight and get into our discussion. So I guess we'll launch in. Gretchen, all good?
All good. Take it away.
Awesome. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the American Repertory Theater is the professional theater that is affiliated and located on the Harvard University campus. And this is a very significant part of the identity of the theater. And it was really a key driver for me as a freelance director in throwing my hat in the ring for this leadership role. I went to Harvard as an undergrad, and I spent my formative years in college seeing shows at the ART, and it forever changed me. And so when I heard the ART was looking for a new artistic director, I had this feeling of what the ART had been very clearly for me as a young person, and where it could lead in the American theater. And I'm now here coming up on 12 years in tenure as artistic director. And a large part of my focus has been thinking about the audience and how we partner with audience. And that will be a theme, I think, even how do we partner with the audience in pandemic times and in the process of reopening our theaters. And also how to fully embrace the research and development function of a theater. And for me, as a practicing artist, as well as an artistic director, the idea that the mission is not just to make a good show, which is hard, but actually we're researching and we're iterating and we're experimenting and we're pushing the form. And our mission at the ART is to expand the boundaries of theater. So for me, that has always been about fundamental questions, asking what is the role of theater? How do we understand its role moving in here the 21st century? What is its, how is theater a civic leader? How are theaters convening spaces for public gathering, for discourse around the most pressing issues of our time? What is the theater's unique capability in catalyzing a kind of compassionate citizenry and a forum for exercising that fundamental muscle of actually listening and being invested in a story that is not your own, which is something I think we need to do more than ever. It's been an interesting moment to be working in this pandemic because the theater is so much about collective space. So how do we redefine our role in this moment, and what are we learning from this disruption is kind of top of mind for me as a leader at ART. I want to speak about public health because about 18 months ago, I got very excited about the role of public health and how a theater and a cultural institution could lift um, issues related to public health, how theaters could be centers for public health. And this was mostly catalyzed because we have a new major capital building project ahead of us at ART. And I had a colleague at the Chan School of Public Health, Professor Howard Koh, an incredible professor, who said to me, you need to meet one of our faculty, Dr. Joseph Allen, who runs the Healthy Buildings program. And back then, I had never heard of such a thing as a healthy building, but I thought if we're making a new building, we certainly want it to be a healthy building. So I reached out to Joe, and he was an amazing colleague and very generous with his time, and came and participated in some design charrettes we had. Now, this is a few years ago, discussing what it means to create a healthy building. So we struck up a friendship and a conversation. And then lo and behold, last March, when the pandemic hit, I had this very great friend in public health that I could call up and say, oh my goodness, what is happening? What do we do? How can you work with us? Initially, I called Joe because he was featured all over the news, CNN, at that time, talking about masks and what are the best kind of masks to wear and how to use them. And like many theaters, our costume department pivoted to making masks, and I wanted to make sure we were making them in the correct way. And then in that conversation with Joe, he was telling me about all the work he was doing with other organizations, corporations, the NBA, legal systems, getting juries back, ways in which other industries and organizations were having to think about protocols to reopen. And I said, well, what about the theater? Could we partner and make perhaps a roadmap for recovery and resilience for the theater? And I was really thinking of this as taking advantage of ART's position at Harvard University, the access we have to a public health school, very unique position to be in as a theater. And Joe was totally excited and joined in with us. And we've had this incredible partnership that has led to the roadmap, which is on our website, which if you haven't seen, it's up and you can view it. And in addition to the roadmap, we've really been in conversation over these last 8 months about thinking about public health. And I can't tell you how gratifying it's been to be in the theater world, feeling like you're leading through fog, which is what it feels like every day, but to actually have a partner and a scientist to help you think through some major issues. And I also want to just quote Joe, who said to me, there is no recovery coming out of this pandemic without the arts. And to have that from the words of a scientist was so affirming. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Joe to enter the Zoom space with me here. Thank you. Hi, thanks for joining. I don't know if you could hear my introduction and my narrative of our partnership, but maybe I'll toss to you and you can say a few things about what this collaboration has meant for you. And then I think the group listening would love to hear about your background in exposure, risk mitigation, science, and all those incredible things you do, and how that is relevant to these times we're living in.
Yeah, so it's really nice to be here with you again, and thanks, Gretchen, and for hosting us. I think a lot about that there is no recovery without the arts. And the reality is, the arts are what's going to pull us through this, really. These are really quite challenging times, to say the least. So it's really been my pleasure to partner with Diane. She said we've become friends over the past year and a half or more, thinking about these ideas of public health. And I was delighted to get the call. One, I'm a fan of her work and the American Repertory Theater. And I used to live in New York and down in Chelsea. My wife and I are big theater fans. So it was really a privilege to participate. And it speaks to Diane's vision here, because it's really unusual to have public health at the table during design charrettes for buildings. It should be the norm, and it's just not. And so very often we're making these decisions around our buildings, be it a theater, a school, an office building, without thinking through the public health ramifications of those decisions, about the products we use to fit out our spaces, the air quality, and how all these things are going to come together. And so more often we're making decisions from an engineering perspective. So of course, it's got to be structurally sound, fire life and safety systems, yes. But we're usually targeting these bare minimums. And public health is not about bare minimums. And Diane's vision never about, let's just do the least we can do that's acceptable. How do we get to think more holistically about what health in a building is really about? So it's really my pleasure to be a part of this. And then, of course, as March hit, we got serious about the other side of health. We were talking about well-being and health promotion. And then, of course, there's the disease avoidance strategy that's in public health. That's the old definition of health, was just disease avoidance. And now it's much more broad than that. But currently we are in a disease avoidance. How do we get through this? So for background, I'm a professor at the Harvard's Chan School of Public Health, and I direct the Healthy Buildings program there. My expertise or background and scientific background is really in the field of exposure and risk science. So I'm a certified industrial hygienist. No one knows what that is, and that's all right, until maybe now people are starting to think about this field. But it's really the field that anticipates, recognizes, assesses, and ultimately controls hazards in the workplace. And this could be radiological hazards, chemical hazards, or biological hazards like we're dealing with right now. So I wouldn't say I'm a true academic. I've been here for a long time now, but I was a consultant before I came on as Harvard full-time on the tenure track, and I still do advising. And I used to do consulting and still do around the topic of sick buildings. So forensic investigations of sick buildings, cancer clusters in buildings. We've had buildings where children had died in the buildings, disease outbreaks in hospitals where people had died. And it was always the question, well, how do you assess that hazard and control it? And so while the pandemic is completely unfamiliar, right, to everybody, there are aspects of it that are totally familiar. And that aspect is we know how to keep people safe in buildings. I've never come across a building or a situation or a hazard where we couldn't control it. We couldn't put in enough mitigation measures to actually make it safe and say, okay, we feel okay about people coming back into this space. And the reality is, we've long known that buildings play a role in disease transmission, the bad and the good. Think about the last SARS, right? SARS-1. One person in a hotel infected 16 others, who then seeded a global outbreak. It wasn't a pandemic, but it was an epidemic. One person on one day in one hotel on one floor started that whole thing. Because of the way the systems were running. So we've known that for a long time. In fact, in December last year, I wrote an editorial with a colleague of mine on Healthy Buildings Research Agenda. And one of the items we called out was the power of buildings in future pandemics. Because it was never a question of, if a pandemic was coming, it was always when. We knew it. We narrowly escaped those other coronaviruses, MERS and SARS, other influenza strains. And we knew that buildings should be the first line of defense in our response. So that's kind of how, my background, I think, it was a really, public health, healthy buildings, holistic, beyond infectious disease. Diane and I started working together. And then, of course, when it came to COVID-19, it's, well, how do we implement or put in a framework and strategy that then we can share with everybody else in the theater community? Because Diane and I both feel this way. We have a responsibility, right? We're at Harvard, where world-class theater, and then we're very rare for a theater like that to be paired with a school of public health. And so it just felt like a natural collaboration. And importantly, to me and to Diane, I know this, we felt a responsibility to take this on. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's so many things I want to talk about, but if you could speak a little bit to the history of buildings and what happened in the 70s and where we maybe went astray in healthy building output,
Yeah.
and the course correction that could happen. And I do want to say for folks that are listening, I've really learned from Joe that, sometimes, especially at a moment of duress in the theater field where we're struggling to just survive and keep our staff paid when all our income has been gutted. A lot of people could say, well, I can't fix my facility. It's just impossible. And I have an old building, and a healthy building is got to be the kind of squeaky clean new thing. So maybe you could speak about that history a bit, and then how you think about creating health in buildings right now and what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. And, you and I have been discussing this, your entire team, we've been discussing this for months now. Yeah, and it's worth looking at, how we got here, because shouldn't every building just be healthy, right? And it should be. And the reality is we are in the sick building era, and we can trace that phrase and the start of that phrase to the late 1970s, where in response to the global energy crisis, we started tightening up our building envelopes. We started really choking off the air supply in our buildings. That's the way to think about it. So you save energy, right? We'll just collapse everything. And when you do that, that leads to a buildup of indoor pollutants. And most people will be surprised that indoor pollutants can be 3, 5, 10 times higher than outdoors, right? We all think about outdoor air pollution. The reality is that indoor air pollution can be a lot worse. And when you tighten that up, your building stops breathing.
And by the way, tell everyone the stats of how much time we spend inside.
Yeah. Yeah, people are surprised on this too, right? We're an indoor species. So we spend 90% of our time indoors. And one way I do this, I sometimes call out people publicly or say, take your age and multiply it by 0.9. We'll see if there's an audience, someone who wants to volunteer, but I'll do it myself, right? So nobody likes public math or disclosing their age. But I'm 45, so my indoor age is 40 years of my life inside my home, schools, office, cars, airplanes. And so you think about that, and the last fact I just said about indoor pollutants being 5, 10 times higher than outdoors. The indoor environment is what's determining our health. Yet if I asked anybody, what constitutes healthy living? Well, you have to exercise. Yep. Got to eat healthy. Yep. Don't smoke. Yep. And how many people would turn and look around their room and say, well, I better start paying attention to what's happening right here in this room where I'm spending all my time. We spend a third of our life in one box, our bedroom. And so this is having a massive influence on our health. And so prior to the 70s, we used to set ventilation standards, or how much air comes in, based on health and, in fact, infectious disease transmission. So 100 years ago, we used to set ventilation rates based on infectious disease. Someone decided somewhere, let's save energy, close off. I mean, it's important to save energy, but in balance with health, close off our systems inside of our buildings. And it was really a couple of years later, we first saw the term sick building syndrome appear, the early 80s. These effects of spending time in poor environments, we've all experienced this, right? A conference room that's stuffy, you can't concentrate, and so, and that's where we've been since. The past, really since the 80s, we've been in the sick building era, designing to these minimum standards. In fact, the standard that determines the ventilation, this is really interesting, is called the standard for acceptable indoor air quality. Acceptable, not healthy indoor air quality, not optimal. It's like this bare minimum that every place you spend your time in is designed to. And this is really fundamentally a problem. I think a lot of buildings are figuring that out right now, that, wow, our systems are not where they should be to keep people safe indoors,
And I think this was so meaningful for me, not only taking on a new building project, but just running a theater in the theater, except for, those folks who do outdoor theater, which we're all considering doing now, pivoting to some good outdoor theater next summer. Theater, we spend a lot of time indoors. I mean, that's our, that's kind of the joke of our business. Like, it's a beautiful sunshiny day, but I'm stuck in the theater all day. But that's, that's the magical world that we create indoors. And I've just really thought about, as a leader of a cultural institution, how often have I personally made my facilities and the air quality in my facilities my priority? So to think about, as you said, standards that are pro health, and this opportunity we have to enter like a health first era, which, is so kind of inspiring, a way to this pandemic was a hard learning curve to that. But can you say a word about how this doesn't have to be expensive? Because I think we have a lot of managing directors from theaters on this call, and
Yeah.
to assure folks that this doesn't have to be a huge capital investment.
Yeah, I think that's important. And, for me, it was quite a learning curve working with you and the team so closely because, I knew theater as a guest, right, as an admirer of theater, but I didn't know the ins and outs of what actually happens and all the work that goes into it. So for me, it's been really quite eye-opening to think about all of the other aspects you have to think about beyond the guests coming in, right, at showtime. But yeah, I've been really careful since February to only make recommendations that are practical, pragmatic, and actually cost effective, right? We could talk all day about new technologies, $1 million this, a couple months to implement. And really, I get it. I work with companies all the time. I like to think I'm pragmatic, not just pie in the sky to say, well, what are the actual things we can do to get people back in safe, but also are feasible financially and everything else. So it's a misperception that healthy buildings are expensive. And I'd argue that unhealthy buildings are actually expensive. People get sick, there's liability, there's brand issues. So we should think about that differently. But in terms of the actual dollars, it's in things about airborne transmission, it's running your outdoor air fans a bit harder. Putting in better filters costs a couple dollars, really. I'm not talking about fancy UV technology that you necessarily need. Then you could think about that. But a lot of this are the basics. It's like the basics of hand washing, right? There's nothing really exciting about hand washing, but it works, right? And so same thing about ventilation and filtration, right? These are like the basics of healthy buildings. And they're tried and true. And then, there are even, we talked about these, Dan, portable air cleaners in places that are problematic, in a back office or something. There's always something you can do that doesn't have to cost that much money. And I guess bigger, in thinking about, and Diane, I could flip it to you about our, the guiding principles here, but one of them is layering defenses, right? We know that there's not one strategy that works in and of itself. There's no silver bullet, oh, we're done. It's ventilation, it's filtration, it's the administrative controls, it's mask wearing, it's handling queues and flows of people, it's doing events like this remotely. So all of it really, really matters, every one, and there's not one solution, right? It's not like ventilation and you're done. Yeah.
I'm looking at the time, 6:26. Maybe Gretchen, if you want to jump back in to help us, because we wanted to open up for questions, because there are so many things we can talk about, but would love to hear if there's an area that folks are curious about. I was talking to Joe before we started the webinar tonight about the good news of that vaccine and how Joe is feeling with the news that's hit amidst this kind of rising spikes across the country, and maybe you could reflect a little bit on, for those of us in the industry that are hoping that there's a light at the end of the tunnel here.
Yes. Give us good news.
Yeah, so there actually is some, well, maybe I should start. Yeah, there's good news. I'll tell you, because especially in the timeline for theater, where I don't think anyone's trying to open in the next 2 or 3 weeks here. And clearly there are some tough signals here. The case counts are rising, as we knew would happen in November. We predicted this in March. It's seasonal forcing. We didn't get our act together over the summer or fall. So There are some clear challenges. Some of these really bad effects are baked into the system. High cases lead to hospitalizations, lead to deaths. And so there's a lag in that system of about 3 weeks. So the next couple of weeks are going to be particularly rough. In addition, after Thanksgiving, we'll expect another peak that will probably hit around the end of the year, Christmas time, New Year's time. So it's going to be a rough couple of weeks here. But we have agency. And I say that because there are things we can do right now. And then I'll talk about kind of the eventual strategy, which is vaccines. We got great news there. So we should talk about the right now strategy, right? We know what works, and it's everything we've been hearing about, which is good. Masking is a must. Distancing is important. You have to wash hands and use hand sanitizer. Ventilation and filtration. And this applies to your home, your office, in a car with friends, crack down the window. And when we do these things, we don't see outbreaks happening. And in fact, if you look at all the outbreaks that have happened, it doesn't really matter to me anyway, if it's the choir practice, spin class, ice hockey, restaurants, you name it, right? They're always hitting the news here and there. Look underneath the underlying factors: time indoors, no masks, low to no ventilation every single time. And when those are in place, we don't have an outbreak. We don't have a reported high profile case. So we have agency. There are things we can do right now, right? So the eventual strategy is vaccine. And we got unbelievable news recently that the first 2 vaccines to report, both using the same technology, a newer vaccine technology or approach, I should say, one from Pfizer, one from Moderna, showing greater than 90% efficacy, right? And this is remarkable for a couple of reasons. One, if you recall, we were hoping for 60%, right? That would have been good. So we're well above that. That's really encouraging. 2, it wasn't a given that this virus would be responsive to a vaccine. Just a couple months ago, no one really knew. So we know this virus is beatable now. That's a big deal. And 3, don't forget, this is a remarkable scientific achievement. Normally, the quickest we've ever produced a vaccine is a couple of years. This is now 10 months. So there is a light here. We'll start to see people vaccinated at the end of the year. It'll take time before the herd immunity builds up, but certainly as the spring and summer roll around, we should be in a really good place. And remember, these aren't the only 2 vaccines. We should be hearing about other vaccine trials soon in the next couple of weeks. So really quite positive news. Other positive news, the change of administration, the Biden transition, coronavirus advisory group, these are top scientists, right? We know them. And they have a network that's right below them. So they tap into a wider network of scientists that are, the scientific community is all working together to kind of bring the best science. And that means that starting in January, we will have a resurgence in terms of trusting science and scientists leading the way here. And things like testing will get amplified. Good communications around vaccine will be amplified. And that's going to go, and the basics of masking, this stuff will start to be amplified in an appropriate and correct way. So that's really a sign of hope. The third one I'll say just real quickly on this is the therapeutics look pretty good. So we've had 2 therapeutics for people who are really, who are really struggling in a hospital. So really severe disease. Well, we have a new set are called monoclonal antibodies that just got approved with an emergency use authorization that are more for early stage illness. So it's another tool in the toolbox that doctors have. And you've seen the mortality rates dropping from at least when people are in the hospital and they're not over capacity since March. And these are new. The therapeutics will also help. Rapid antigen testing is coming along. So by the spring and summer, there'll be more testing capacity and at-home testing capacity, like home pregnancy type tests. So all of those things really give me hope that coming out of this winter, I feel confident that we're not going to be a year from now really struggling. We should be in a much, much better place. So that was long-winded, I'm sorry, but covered a couple of things there.
It's wonderful and super encouraging. And I guess because it's my job, there are 2 things I have to think about. One is theater and the other is money, and how they work in concert. And as everybody probably here tonight knows, money is always a challenge for theater in good times, in normal times, whatever. And now it's particularly challenging. And I'm thinking about having read a lot of the work that you've done on your website, which is fantastic, I'm thinking about the theaters and how they have these increased costs to retrofit their existing facilities, not to mention implementing new operating practices, thinking about having smaller audiences and distancing more. I mean, there's just a lot of increasing costs, I think. And now we introduce this wonderful news that we may have vaccines right around the corner. And I'm trying to understand, like, what does that mean for the costs? And, you know, I think both of you probably could speak to where we are today and where we go in the future with this, with a vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I'm going to address your question, Gretchen. But what it makes me think is, what are we learning in this pandemic that is going to make our theaters, our institutions, our organizations stronger moving forward? And that is everything from kind of waking up to health and prioritizing health, and then communicating about health and raising it as a value in how we think about the sustainability of our of our planet, of our organization, and each other, our fellow human beings and our audiences. So I couldn't agree more of the stress financially, but I get energized when I think about the learning we're undergoing that is not just a stopgap, but long-term learning, right? Long-term learning. And that also includes reckoning with the racial injustice in this country. And Joe and I have talked a lot. It's in our roadmap that, you know, racism in America is a public health epidemic. It's another one of the colliding pandemics, right? So I think the opportunity of this disruption to invest, spend time, resource, think about, prioritize all these things that we don't always think about when we're rushing to deliver product and get the show on. You know, is this form of, you know, a blessing that we're trying to take on? And I think, you know, my staff has been very vocal about their concern that when we reopen, how are we going to hold all these values? How are we going to continue to hold these values when, you know, when we're crazy busy again? So I mean, that to me is going to be the challenge, is how do we prioritize health? But I get really excited about this health first era. I said it earlier, I dropped it in because I know, you know, Joe, you've spoken about it. And I just think theaters can have a major role to play in our society. I've always been interested in a director. Okay, yes, we make shows, but really, what is our role in society? What is our role civically? What is our role, not just to theater fans, but to, you know, to the general person living out there? You know, how can we have meaning? You know, not just to fans of theater, but how can theaters be beacons? And we all run institutions. We have buildings. We are experts in communication. That's what we do. We invest in storytelling and emotional kind of, empathy and energy building. So I get excited about how theaters can lead the way. In 8 months, public health is now on everybody's brain. I mean, really, a year ago, I was trying to tell my board members, like, I think there's a major synergy between arts and public health, and they didn't get it. I mean, they really didn't get it. They were like, explain that to me. And I think it's because people really didn't understand public health. But I think, you know, it's been a traumatic experience, but we all understand public health now, having lived through, like viscerally lived through and suffered through this pandemic. So how do we take advantage of this? and not succumb to the great American, disease of like forgetting and just moving on. But how are we going to rally around this? So I don't know, Joe, if you have a thought on that as well.
Well, I love hearing you talk about it. I mean, this is, that's why I like working with Diane. The great leaders have their eye on what's coming next, right? And the bigger vision and learning and using this opportunity. I shouldn't say an opportunity, the tragedy of this to do better going forward. And so, some people are saying, well, we just have to get back to last January. Well, that's not coming back, one. And two, I think about what Ed Young wrote in The Atlantic. He said, do we really want to go back to normal? Normal is what got us here. Like we really have to do things differently. I don't want to go back to January because January led to this disaster. So this January, we have to do things differently, right? So I agree with Diane, it's a real opportunity to say, let's fundamentally rethink a couple things here across all of these dimensions she mentioned, because, and we really have such a responsibility to get this right. And we've been talking about the health first era, and I relate it back to 9/11, and that ushered in 20 years of security focus, dominated everything, right? Dominated spending, our attention. And so this is a world-changing event. This is a 100-year event. This is shaping our kids. They are going to be different because of this, right? Your audience members will be different because of this. We'll all be different in ways we don't quite know, right? And so it's the health first era. There's a new consciousness, right? Public health wasn't on the radar of anybody. And now it's like, okay, everybody knows epidemiology. Everybody knows about epidemiology now. These things are really fundamental to understanding how we live lives that are not just that disease avoidance, but where we can thrive. And for me, anyway, the part of the thriving is my focus is on the built environment. So what aspects can we do differently in our homes, our offices, our schools, and theaters to make it a better experience for everybody, where health is kind of core, just built into the DNA of an organization. So this has been a challenging year, to say the least. And I do get excited by thinking that, there's something coming better soon. We will get out of this. And I'm even more excited about what we can use this learning moment to kind of shape the next years so that it's better. We do better than what got us here.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see, Diane, I love this question, so I'm going to address it to you. You and ART have been great friends of Theater Forward for years. Can you speak about how Theater Forward has helped the ART and how Theater Forward can continue to help you fulfill your mission?
Yeah, such a great question. I think it has so much to do with building community and building a network for theaters. We all operate in our cities around the country. And I think what has been so brilliant about Theater Forward is bringing us together across all our institutions, giving us financial support. Gretchen, looping back to your point of the financial resourcing that the theater industry needs right now, and I mean, I love the title of Theater Forward. How are we thinking about the health and vitality of the industry? And I think to have an organization that is lifting that, especially in connecting us into the corporate universe. So the opportunity to have members from corporate boards that feel passionate about supporting the arts and understanding the impact they can have, that just can be amplified through an organization like Theater Forward. So you're really spreading your impact across this network of theaters, and the opportunity to have conversations like this across theaters where we can share inspiration, share learning, become stronger as an industry. And I just want to take a moment to say how vital that corporate piece is, because we have a great tradition of individual philanthropy in this country, much more so than Europe. But I think the corporate partnership with theaters and how maybe there's this real marriage. I just want to go on record saying tonight about health first, right? Because it's in everyone's interest. It's in the society's interest. It's in a corporation's interest, and it's maybe there's a partnership that we can forge, where resourcing can really be invested in the theater sector, and it will amplify the health of our country, right? We're not just talking about one show. We're really talking about modeling behavior, modeling values, and it trickling down, like something like our roadmap on our website. We were really passionate that this was a regional theater offering this in partnership with Harvard, but we wanted it to be accessible to our partner theaters in the Lorton Network, to high school theater departments across the country, to our colleagues on Broadway. We're part of one large ecosystem. So I think just the way we've been unified through this pandemic, because we've all had this similar experience, I think, the more we can unify and embrace big ideas like how theater can play a leadership role in the health first era, and partner with organizations like Theater Forward, is going to make the society stronger. And I'm in it for that. I love to make a good show, but I really became a director and I got in the theater because I really wanted to make, I wanted to have an impact on our lives and the way we live, and the way we the way we what the value of human life, not just for theater, but really for our general sense of well-being.
And that's the point, really, of it all. And I would say that both of you are having a great impact on the way we live, and a positive impact. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. We also very much appreciate you spending this time with Theater Forward and our guests to really talk about the work you're doing. So with that, we will move on. We just to bring this program home. But thank you so much, Diane, and thank you, Dr. Allen, so much. I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yes, and I do want to say that the roadmap is on the website, and it's a living document. And we will be putting out, we've had 2 editions, and coming in the new year, we're going to bring out the 3rd edition of the roadmap. So stay tuned. There's a place to write us on the website if you have particular questions, concerns. We want it to be kind of an open source and a place for dialogue. So looking forward to connecting, even though I can't see anybody on the webinar. I feel you out there, and I would love to, stay connected across all our incredible theaters and supporters here tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gretchen.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Bye,
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
So now I would just like to hand things over to my colleague, Carl Sylvester. Hello, Carl.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Carl Sylvester. I'm Theater Forward's Director of Development. I'll be on behalf of everyone at Theater Forward. Thank you, Diane and Joe, for such an inspiring conversation this evening. Thank you for all that you do. Special thanks to our colleagues at the American Repertory Theater, Stephen, Noreen, Sarah, Mary, and everyone at the ART who helped make this conversation possible. Now, if you enjoyed today's conversation, please sign up for our future Spotlight series by clicking through on the link that is now available in the chat. Now, after the first of the year, we'll be back on Thursday, January 14th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, where we will turn our spotlight on Actors Theater of Louisville in Kentucky, home of the world-famous Humana Festival of New American Plays, currently under the leadership of Executive Artistic Director Robert Barry Fleming. Also, please mark your calendars for Monday, February 8th, to join us for Theater Forward's virtual benefit. Now, people like you make it possible for Theater Forward and its member theaters to carry on their vital work. For more information about our work and to financially support Theater Forward and our 19 member theaters, please visit theaterforward.org. So now, until next time, please stay safe and goodbye.